Alright, so let's talk about the New World, shall we? Yet another MMO in which I completely threw my life into without having anything to show for. And I'm not kidding, I spent over 40 hours over the past weekend and I barely got to level 24, kinda breaching level 25, did a few dungeons, kinda wasted my time doing everything that I could, like exploring, testing builds, and the weapons and whatnot, and you know what? I'm having a ton of fun in this game. That is why I also wanted to kinda bring you my first impressions of New World and also show you what this game actually does, especially what it does different compared to other MMOs out there. So what is New World, you might ask? Well, this is an upcoming MMORPG developed by Amazon Game Studios and it is set to release next month on August 31st. Now the game right now is in its closed beta, which you can get access to by the way by either pre-ordering the game or by getting your hands on a beta invite code, and you can do that before August 2nd, which is the last day of the closed beta. But I mean, yeah, the servers are so overrun that they fell multiple times a day over the past weekend alone, but you know, progress has been made, especially with the patches and the maintenance window since then, but we will talk about that a bit later in the video. Now here is the thing you need to know about New World. Just like what the name implies, this is about, you know, setting your own path. This is set in the age of discovery, and this applies both to how you play and see the game and also how you build your character. So in New World there's no real class restriction, and this is something that I immediately enjoyed. The fact that I could create a character right away and not have to worry about any future metas, because I could just, you know, use the same character and just play those things that I wanted to play in the future in case things change to the current one. So the character progression in New World is made over three major categories. The first one is the character core attributes, you know, things like strength, dexterity, intelligence, and so on, and as you level up you gain points that you invest into these core attributes. Now depending on which attribute you choose, these will influence different types of weapons. So if you want to play like a spellcaster mage, you're going to obviously want to invest points into intelligence, but if you want to play kind of like a warrior or a tank, you might want strength or maybe constitution, and you know, just invest points into these depending on what you're building. The next layer of progression is going to be weapon masteries, and these are essentially the more you use weapons, the more you level them up, and they also have their own skill trees. So as these weapons level up, you gain points and invest into their own particular skill trees, which will give you access to brand new passive and active abilities, which is what makes these so interesting, because you can kind of play with these weapons, level them up as you kill monsters, unlock new abilities and skills, and become even more powerful with the way you combine these with the character attributes. The final ones are the trade skills. I'm not going to talk too much about these because I haven't spent too much into them, but you have your gathering, your refining, and your crafting skills, in total 17 of them. So everything from, you know, gathering wood, skinning animals, all the way to crafting gems, armor pieces, weapons, potions, and refining materials to grab these in the first place. So overall, I really enjoyed this level of complexity. The reason I didn't focus too much on these is because I really wanted to have something fresh for when the game comes out. I only did minimal investing in them so that I can complete various quests that had requirements in terms of collecting certain resources that themselves were required for me to have certain trade skills levels. This also brings me to that point I was making, the fact that you don't have to re-roll the next class meta, you don't have to create a new character and level that up. All you have to do is to just switch to the weapon, level that up, and then, you know, just play with the build around until you get what you want out of your current character. And which also brings me to the combat, and I think one of the game's strongest and weakest points right now. So New World makes use of action combat, which is essentially, you know, no auto lock, no tap targeting against enemies. It kind of feels like Dark Souls meets MMO, where you have to be careful against enemy attacks while managing your stamina bar, though obviously nowhere near as difficult as that game. Still pretty difficult. It definitely feels like it's one of those games in which you have to be a bit more careful on how you engage against enemies. It definitely isn't World of Warcraft, where you can go ahead and pull like 50 mobs, AoE them, and walk without a scratch. That's not it. This is like 1, 2, 3 enemies at best, and count yourself lucky if you're not getting destroyed by them, even at a a low level. Now this all sounds good in theory, and I have no doubt that if they fix it, it's gonna be one of the best combats out there in any MMORPG, but right now it falls flat, and mainly it's because of performance issues and server stability, because if you have even the smallest lag spike or even a bit of a higher ping, you're not gonna be able to properly time your dodges and parries, and often you're going to see yourself grabbing the full damage with your face even though you pressed the buttons at the proper time. I would also add some of the weird telegraphed enemy attacks and weird animations that could be flashed out to make combat a little bit more responsive and not that clunky. There's a few more things that add to the combat clunkiness. I'm not gonna stay too much on them, but it's usually some of the animations that you get locked into momentarily that makes the flow of combat a little bit too restricting at times, and it's a shame because some of these weapons are amazing, some of the skills that you use are really impactful, and like both the visual and the audio feedback from them is really high end, I will say that. So it's very satisfying to pull, for example, a couple of enemies or go into a dungeon and pull a group of enemies and just like unleash your flurry of attacks and see how satisfying it is to like mash all of these down in quick succession. Another thing that I really enjoyed about New World is of course New World, or should I say its massive open world. I really appreciate a game that doesn't have anything instance, well, with the exception of the instances, but we will talk about that later. So pretty much the entire map is opened, explorable, and most important, it looks freaking amazing. Like at one point you can be into one of these towns with 100+ other players around and then just, walk away, go in any direction, maybe even on the other side of the map, assuming you can survive on your way, but you're not going to encounter any loading screen on the way unless you're using fast travel or you're crashing at some point. But I will say this about New World and its environment: it is by far one of the most lush and dense environment I've seen in any game up until this point, especially so MMORPG. I don't think there's any other MMO out there that has done dense environments this way, which makes walks into forests even that more amazing, and some of these vegetation elements are really top notch. That unfortunately does not come without a cost, which is performance, and you will need a really powerful PC to handle the max graphical settings, which also means you're gonna run into heat issues, especially during summer. This is especially noticeable if you go into any of the busy towns and like get to play around 100+ players, and you will quickly notice that your FPS will tank to a fraction of what it was previously. I mean, yes, it makes sense, there's a lot of players, and usually this is one of the problems MMORPGs have, which is the fact that if there's a lot of players into a small area, there is going to be a lot of lag. But in this case, it's that plus the really high-end graphics. Of course, you can turn them off, but it's not gonna look as pretty. Now, as I've said previously, there are elements of survival when it comes to New World, and that's mainly because initially I believe this was supposed to be a survival MMORPG, but things changed along the way, and some of the things were still kept in the game. One of them is the camp system, which I really like. You can essentially build a small little campfire anywhere you want to, well, assuming it's outside of a city or a major point of interest. You can build it there, and it's going to be a permanent teleport point you can use, assuming your camp is still up and running. You can also use it to like rest onto it, replenish your HP, and also use it for crafting, but more like the minimal stuff like potions and whatnot. It's still really awesome to have that. I also enjoy going into forests, hunting for animals, getting their pelts, and maybe like even chopping down trees, because I know that's going to be super useful for crafting later on, and also gaining additional benefits for my character's build. Now, in terms of traversal, most of it, as I've said, you make it by foot, and you can also use the fast travel system, but yeah, the game does not feature any mounts, and it was clearly created without a focus around mounts. This in turn raises a couple of problems. First of all, it's the fact that you spend way too much time running at a snail's pace, which is a problem that's even more accentuated by the fact that your characters cannot sprint. Like, why have a stamina bar if you cannot use it to sprint with your character? At this point, they're just brisk walking or jogging at the very best. Second of all, some of the fast travel systems in place don't really seem to help out, except to make an even bigger inconvenience with the way they feel, because they may feel a bit too restrictive. For example, if you set an inn into a current, town that you've been into, you can only teleport back to it from, other parts of the map every hour or so. I think that should be reduced to about 30 minutes, maybe even 25. Second of all, if you want to access a quick travel point, you actually have to be inside of a town or physically access them out in the wild, but they can be pretty scattered out in the wild, so you still have to run to them, which takes a really long time. Again, the developers have not completely ruled out mounts off the table yet, so they might get released with the game, or maybe sometimes after that. They are still up to debate, and you can freely express your opinion on this. Personally, I could go with no mounts, assuming that they add a sprint system by using our stamina in the first place. I will also add the fact that there's a strange lack of no swimming animations in New World, and that makes traversal, especially around body of waters, even more troublesome. Now, in terms of the quests, I really appreciated the fact that they don't feel too grindy, like they don't have objectives with too many things, with a few exceptions here and there. They do become a little bit annoying a little bit later on, but most of the early quests were taking like a couple of minutes to complete at most, and I was able to quickly complete them and like gather a really big backlog of completed quests for really massive XP payouts. At the same time, I really appreciated that almost every quest I was giving in would reward one guaranteed chest, which meant I was quickly showered into a lot of items, which meant I could test a lot of builds quite early on in the game. On the other hand, after doing like a couple dozen or so of these, you will quickly realize that there's a limited number of objectives that the game has to throw at you, so they can become repetitive. Especially if you do the town projects, they will eventually repeat themselves even on the same board, on the same rotation. Now, that's it though with the quest. Let's talk about some of the other endgame activities. Of course, the main point of this game is both PvE and PvP. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention, and really I should have talked about it way earlier, is the fact that the game features a multi-faction system. You can join one out of 3 factions, which are the Marauders, the Syndicate, and the Covenant, and there's some major benefits for you to actually do this. The first one is the immediate benefit, which is the fact that you can open up faction quests, complete them for reputation and points, and then use them to gain access to really cool exclusive gear and items at their respective faction vendors. The more complex result of this is faction wars. Essentially, factions will constantly fight for supremacy. You're going to constantly want to gain control over regions, set your own taxes, and wage war against other factions. That sounds awesome because there's a real incentive for you to actually go in and participate in these. On one side is because you have much lower taxes on crafting and trading, which means you don't have to pay that much to them in order to make a living or maybe craft something or build up your character, which sounds again really awesome. It also, just sounds fun to be rewarded and get a lot more money with your faction and with the other guilds or companies you're playing with, because you're contributing to a common goal. I would also argue that it's PvP and it's fun if done right. And the final thing that I enjoyed a lot was the expeditions, or should I say the expedition that I did. I only did one because I'm pretty low level still, so they start around level 25, and the first one I did is Amber Mine, which is also tied to the main story. I really enjoyed it. It reminded me of how I played World of Warcraft back in the days, just having fun with random strangers, trying to take on these challenges, these really tough enemies, and get really cool rewards at the end. And I really enjoy the fact that there's many hidden chests in these expeditions or dungeons, so that means you will be showered in quite a bit of loot by the end of it. It also doesn't take too long to complete, like half an hour. If you have a decent group, I think you can complete these most of the time, or maybe even less than that. But in the full game there's going to be a lot more. There's also invasions that happen around the map. These are kind of like random events that happen. They are active, they happen on the map, so you can just group up with people that also happen to be in the vicinity, or use general chat to form a group and go in and take these down for, again, extra PvE rewards. rewards. So overall, it looks very promising. Right now, the game is, you know, having some difficulties. There's a huge influx of players, the servers are kind of acting up, but over the weekend, they have done a lot of improvements, at least here in Europe. And I can see this game becoming a major contender to the other big MMOs right now, like World of Warcraft, Guild Wars, Elder Scrolls Online, Final Fantasy XIV. If it flashes out some of its issues that I was talking about in this video, it could genuinely become the next big hit MMORPG if done right. But this is it with my first impressions. Let me know if you played it, if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.